The first time my younger sister called my 8-year-old son baggage, she did it into a microphone in front of 180 wedding guests. The second time, my father laughed and added, "That's what happens when you shop in the clearance aisle." My mother covered her mouth, but I saw her smiling behind her hand. I had paid for the wedding shuttles, spent 3 weekends fixing my sister's seating disasters, and used 5 vacation days, making sure her perfect mountain wedding did not fall apart. My son had not even been invited because my sister said his presence would make the family photographs look complicated. My name had been removed from the family table that morning and placed beside the ballroom service doors under a card that said only, "Rachel Mercer guest." I had promised myself I would not cry, argue, or give my family the scene they had been predicting since I walked through the door. Then my sister's new husband stood up, took the microphone from her hand, and said, "Paige, I cannot celebrate a marriage with someone who needs her own sister to stay ashamed so she can feel successful." The room went so quiet I could hear ice settling inside glasses. By Thanksgiving, the same family would be begging me to take Paige into my home, call in favors to save her career, and pretend none of that wedding night had ever happened. My name is Rachel Mercer. I was 35 years old when all of this happened, living in Denver, Colorado, raising my son Eli alone, and working as an emergency operations coordinator for a regional hospital system. My job was not glamorous. Nobody invited emergency coordinators onto morning television when everything went right. We existed for the days people hoped never came: blizzards that shut mountain roads, wildfire smoke that forced a clinic evacuation, power failures, water contamination, emergency staffing shortages, mass casualty drills, and every other moment when panic was expensive and somebody needed a plan. I was good at that work because chaos made sense to me. There was always a list. What is happening? Who is vulnerable? What do we have? What is missing? What can fail next? Family was harder because family did not admit it was an emergency. My parents, Frank and Susan Mercer, lived in a large suburban house outside Fort Collins where my sister Paige and I grew up. Paige was 33, beautiful in the kind of polished way that made people assume she had never stood in a grocery store calculating whether shampoo could wait until payday. She worked as a senior brand strategist for a luxury outdoor living company. She understood lighting, captions, timing, networking, and how to turn ordinary moments into evidence that her life was going beautifully. My father adored that about her. Dad owned a small chain of appliance stores and believed presentation was half of success. He loved saying Paige had inherited his instinct for people. My mother loved that Paige made family photographs easy. She was slim, stylish, married at exactly the age Mom considered appropriate, and rarely said anything that made relatives uncomfortable. I was the useful daughter. The difference between being loved and being useful took me far too long to understand because usefulness came wrapped in praise. Rachel is so responsible. Rachel can handle anything. Rachel doesn't need much. Rachel understands. Those sentences followed me from childhood into adulthood, and nearly everyone ended with me giving something up. When Paige forgot her lunch, I delivered it because I was older and more mature. We were only 19 months apart. When Paige missed the school bus because she spent 40 minutes curling her hair, I was expected to drive her. When I complained, Mom asked why everything had to become a competition. If Paige got a B, Dad celebrated because she had balanced school with cheerleading and friends. If I got an A-, he asked whether I had rushed. Paige was not stupid. She was smart enough to understand the system early and graceful enough to benefit without looking cruel. She rarely demanded anything directly. She sighed, she cried, she became overwhelmed. Then somebody looked at me. At 16, I gave her the money I had saved from a summer job because she needed a dress for homecoming, and Mom said the family budget was tight. At 17, I missed a scholarship preparation workshop because Paige had locked her keys inside her car. At 19, I moved out for community college and still drove home twice a week because Mom said Paige was struggling with the transition after high school. Every sacrifice was small enough to look petty if I named it. That was how the system protected itself. My life changed when I met Daniel Hart at 25. He was funny, restless, and full of plans. For 2 years, I believed his plans included me. When I became pregnant, he cried from happiness, bought tiny sneakers, and told everyone he was ready to become a father. 4 months later, he accepted a sales job in Phoenix and said the distance would be temporary. By the time Eli was born, Daniel's calls had become irregular. By Eli's first birthday, he was sending money only when I reminded him. By Eli's third, he had a new girlfriend and a new explanation about why he needed space. I stopped begging. I went back to school part-time, worked dispatch shifts at night, and moved into emergency management because I discovered I was good at staying clear-headed while other people panicked. Motherhood was exhausting, but Eli was never the burden my family described. He was the reason I stopped waiting for unreliable people to become reliable. My family reacted to single motherhood as though I had committed a social offense they were required to manage. Mom worried about what people would ask. Dad said I had always chosen the difficult route. Paige hugged me and called me brave, then began using my life as a cautionary tale whenever she wanted to praise her own judgment. "I love Rachel," she once told friends at Thanksgiving, but watching her taught me never to ignore red flags. I was standing 6 feet away carving turkey because Dad's wrist hurt. Everyone laughed politely. When I asked Paige later why my failed relationship needed to become dinner entertainment, she said I was embarrassed because part of me knew she was right. Mom told me to let it go. Dad said, "If you don't want people talking about your mistakes, don't make public mistakes." Eli was 4 when he first noticed. We were driving home from Christmas dinner when he asked, "Why does Grandpa say Daddy leaving was because you make bad choices?" I nearly drove through a red light. I told him adults sometimes spoke carelessly. He asked whether he was a bad choice. I pulled into a parking lot and turned around so quickly my seatbelt locked. "You are the best choice I ever made." He stared at me with enormous brown eyes and nodded. I smiled until he looked away, then cried in the grocery store parking lot after he fell asleep. That should have been the moment I stopped going back. It was not. Family loyalty can survive evidence that would kill any normal friendship. I kept believing there would be one birthday, one holiday, one conversation where my parents finally saw what the jokes were doing. Instead, I became quieter. Quiet people are extremely convenient to families that do not want consequences. Paige met Ethan Cole 4 years ago at a fundraising dinner in Denver. Ethan worked for a nonprofit foundation that financed disaster recovery, affordable housing, and infrastructure projects in rural Western communities. He was not flashy. That surprised me because Paige normally liked men who could turn dinner reservations into social currency. Ethan listened more than he spoke. He restored old radios, drove a 10-year-old Subaru, and spent weekends volunteering with a rebuilding crew outside Boulder. The first time I met him, he asked what I did. Paige answered before I could. "Rachel manages hospital chaos. She loves emergencies because she gets to boss everyone around." Ethan looked at me instead of laughing. "What kind of emergencies?" I explained a winter storm response we had recently coordinated after Interstate 70 closures prevented staff from reaching 2 hospitals. He asked 3 specific questions that showed he understood logistics. Paige interrupted by asking whether anyone wanted more wine. Later, she told me I had dominated the conversation. He asked about my work. "Rachel, you gave him a briefing." He seemed interested. Her smile tightened. "He's polite." That exchange should have warned me. About 8 months later, Ethan's foundation became involved in recovery work after severe flooding damaged several small towns in western Colorado. Our hospital system supported temporary clinics and medication deliveries. I ended up creating a transportation and supply model that coordinated county buses, volunteer drivers, fuel depots, and pharmacy deliveries across 3 communities. I did most of the design after Eli went to sleep because emergency plans do not care about childcare schedules. The project worked. Patients who had been missing dialysis appointments got transportation. A mobile clinic stopped wasting hours waiting for supplies. The foundation saved money by canceling an overpriced private contractor that had been billing emergency rates for nearly every service. Ethan contacted me afterward and said his organization was building a small consultant pool for future disasters. He asked whether I would consider applying for a paid regional role outside my hospital hours. I said yes, assuming my employer approved it. He sent paperwork. I completed interviews. Then everything stopped. Weeks later, Ethan told me the selection committee had received significant concerns about my reliability and personal circumstances. He looked uncomfortable saying it. What circumstances? I probably shouldn't share details. Then why mention them? He sighed. The committee was told you had a complicated custody history, that your hospital work record was not as strong as represented, and that stress had caused you to miss obligations before. My skin went cold. The hospital claim was nonsense. The custody details were private. Only a few family members knew them. I asked who had raised the concerns. Ethan said the email was anonymous. I should have investigated then. Instead, humiliation did what it always did to me. It turned inward. I wondered whether Daniel had contacted someone. I wondered whether a coworker disliked me. I wondered whether maybe Ethan had invited me only because I was Paige's sister and the board had correctly decided I was not impressive enough. I told him not to worry about it and changed the subject. Paige later asked why the consulting thing had disappeared. When I said there had been anonymous concerns, she frowned sympathetically. Maybe it's for the best. You already have so much on your plate with Eli. I believed she was comforting me. That is the part I still struggle to forgive myself for. Not trusting her. Trusting her was normal. I struggle with how quickly I assumed something must be wrong with me. 2 years after meeting Ethan, Paige announced their engagement. My parents reacted like an Olympic committee had awarded us the games. Mom began a wedding binder within 24 hours. Dad offered a large contribution. Paige selected a luxury lodge outside Colorado Springs with mountain views, stone fireplaces, huge windows, and rooms expensive enough to make ordinary water feel underdressed. I was genuinely happy for her. That is important. I was not waiting to watch Paige fail. I wanted her to have a good marriage. I wanted Ethan to become family, because he was one of the few people connected to Paige who had ever spoken to me like my life was interesting without being tragic. When Mom asked me to help with wedding logistics, I said yes. Then helping became working. The shuttle company needed pickup routes between 4 hotels and the venue. I built them. The florist needed refrigerated storage after a delivery change. I found it. A snowstorm threatened one of Paige's planning weekends, so I rebuilt the entire vendor schedule. When the welcome dinner restaurant double booked, I found another location within 2 hours. Paige thanked me privately and introduced me publicly as our emergency girl. 3 months before the wedding, Dad called saying costs had gotten out of control. He had promised more than he could comfortably cover, but he was embarrassed to tell Ethan's parents. The shuttle contract had an $8,000 balance. Paige was crying because elderly relatives could not drive mountain roads after dark. I paid it. I told myself it was my wedding gift. Mom said, I knew we could count on you. Nobody asked whether I had been saving that money for anything. I had. I wanted to replace my 14-year-old car. I postponed it. Useful daughters are very good at postponing themselves. Then came the question about Eli. Paige called 3 weeks before the wedding. Her voice had the careful brightness she used when asking for something selfish. I need you not to get upset. That is rarely a promising opening. She laughed too hard. We've made the reception adults. Only. Ethan's nieces are 6 and 9. They're in the ceremony. Eli is your nephew. Silence. Paige? It's not personal. Then explain it. She sighed. The Livingstons are formal people. Ethan's last name was Cole, but his mother's family, the Livingstons, had significant money and deep roots in Colorado Springs. Paige had become obsessed with impressing them. What does that have to do with Eli? I don't want everyone asking where his father is. I actually laughed because the sentence was so ugly I assumed I had misunderstood. Nobody at your wedding is going to conduct a census of 8-year-old fathers. Rachel, please. It's one night. He knows you're getting married. He already picked out a tie. He doesn't have to know why he isn't coming. Something inside me went cold. You want me to lie to my child because his family structure embarrasses you. I did not say embarrass. You said complicated. Paige snapped. This is exactly why I hate talking to you. Everything turns into an accusation. Mom called 30 minutes later. Do not make your sister choose between a peaceful wedding and your feelings. Why is peace always defined as me agreeing? Mom exhaled. Eli is a child. He'll get over it. That sentence made my decision for me. I almost skipped the wedding entirely. Then Eli asked whether missing it would make Grandma sad. He had learned our family's emotional hierarchy far too young. I arranged a sitter. On the morning of the wedding, he helped fasten a bracelet around my wrist. He wore dinosaur pajamas and had cereal milk on his upper lip. Are they going to be nice to you if I'm not there? He asked. My chest hurt. Of course. Promise? I hesitated just long enough that he noticed. So I changed the promise. I promise I'll take care of myself. He nodded seriously, then handed me a folded piece of notebook paper. Inside was a drawing of me wearing a blue dress beside a stick figure mountain. Across the top he had written, "Mom can leave if people are mean." I laughed. Did your teacher help you spell mean? No, I know mean. That answer followed me all day. The venue looked like a catalog designed to sell wealthy people the idea of wilderness. Stone walls, pine beams, roaring fireplaces, glass doors opening toward mountains pink with evening light. I parked myself because valet service cost $40, and something about paying another person to park my aging Honda felt absurd after funding the guest shuttles. At the entrance, a photographer asked whether I was coordinating vendors. Before I answered, Mom appeared in a champagne-colored dress. She scanned me from shoes to hair. You look nice. Thank you. Please don't bring up Eli tonight. Paige is already emotional. I had not said his name. That was my family's favorite trick, warning me not to create the conflict they had already created. Inside, I checked the seating chart. I had originally been at the family table beside Mom. My name had been moved to table 11 near the service entrance, between two of Paige's coworkers and a distant cousin from Nebraska. The place card read simply, Rachel Mercer guest. I asked the wedding planner whether there had been an error. Her expression told me there had not. The bride adjusted a few family placements this morning. Mom found me before I reached Paige. Please don't. Why am I not with the family? Ethan's relatives asked for a balanced table. What does balanced mean? She looked toward the ballroom. Couples. So because I'm single, I'm not family. Stop phrasing everything in the most hurtful possible way. You mean accurately? Her jaw tightened. If you make a scene, everyone will think you're jealous. There it was, the threat underneath everything. Accept humiliation quietly, or we will rename your reaction jealousy. I sat at table 11. I had brought Paige and Ethan a wedding gift in a small walnut box. Ethan collected vintage scientific instruments, and I had found a beautifully restored brass field compass at an estate sale. Inside the lid, I had engraved, "May you always know what deserves to guide you." It had cost more than I should have spent after paying for the shuttles. I placed it beside my water glass. One of Paige's co-workers, Monica, recognized me from a company charity event and said, "You're the sister who does disaster response, right? Paige talks about you all the time." I could tell from her tone that the stories were entertaining. Hopefully some of it is true. Monica laughed uncertainly. Dinner passed. Mom delivered a toast about how Paige had always known how to bring beauty into a room. Dad praised her judgment and said Ethan was lucky to have a woman who never settled for less than the best. I clapped. Nobody mentioned me, which was fine. I had not expected a toast. Then Paige stood. She looked radiant. That is the strange part about people who hurt you. They do not become physically ugly when they are cruel. Sometimes they look perfect. She thanked Ethan, his parents, the bridesmaids, the planner, and everyone who had traveled. Then she smiled toward me. And I have to mention my sister, Rachel, because no Mercer family event is complete without a little emergency management. Laughter. I smiled automatically. Rachel has always been independent, Paige continued. And by independent, I mean, men seemed to become geographically independent shortly after dating her. Louder laughter. My stomach tightened. She raised her glass. But honestly, she's inspiring. Single mom, full-time job, no husband, old car, and she still has the confidence to show up to weddings. Dad laughed. Mom looked down but did not stop smiling. Paige should have stopped. Instead, she became bolder as the room rewarded her. Eli is adorable, obviously. We all love him. But I told Rachel tonight was adults only, because formal weddings are expensive enough without adding emotional baggage. A few people did not laugh. Most still did. Dad called from his seat. Package deals are harder to move. The laughter became scattered and ugly. I looked at Mom. She covered her mouth, but her shoulders moved. My son was sitting at home in dinosaur pajamas, because these people considered his existence socially inconvenient, and now he was entertainment anyway. I heard his voice from that morning. Mom can leave if people are mean. Paige tilted her head toward me. Maybe she'll catch the bouquet. Colorado has plenty of outdoorsy men. Somebody probably wants a fixer-upper with a bonus kid. I stopped hearing the room clearly. My palms became cold. Then a chair moved behind the head table. Ethan stood. Paige laughed. Oh, relax. Rachel knows I'm kidding. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. No, I don't think she does. The microphone amplified his voice enough that conversations died instantly. Paige's smile faltered. Ethan held out his hand. Give me the mic. Why? Please. She surrendered it reluctantly. Ethan looked toward me. Rachel, I owe you an apology. Nobody in my family had apologized to me in years without adding a but. I stared at him. Last year, my foundation invited Rachel to apply for a regional disaster recovery contract because her hospital transportation plan was one of the best systems our team reviewed. People turned toward me. Paige went completely still. Ethan continued. Before the final selection, we received an anonymous email saying Rachel had lied about her work record, had an unstable custody situation, and might create reputational problems. Dad shifted in his chair. Mom's face changed. I should have asked Rachel directly. I didn't. I allowed the committee to hesitate. That was my mistake. Paige whispered. Ethan, not here. He looked at her. I asked you about that email 3 weeks ago. The air left the room. You told me you had no idea who sent it. Paige's eyes flicked toward Mom. Ethan took out his phone. Yesterday, I was moving honeymoon files from the shared laptop you use for freelance work. Your old sent folder was still synced. Mom whispered. Oh God. Ethan did not read a long message. He read one sentence. If Rachel gets that contract, she'll spend another year acting like some heroic single mother. The board needs to know what she's actually like. Then he read the reply. It was from Mom. Do what you need to do. She needs to focus on Eli instead of competing with you. The entire ballroom changed shape around me. I looked at my mother. She stared at the table. Paige snatched for the microphone. Ethan moved it away. You sent private screenshots from Rachel's custody paperwork. My chest tightened. Years earlier, during a particularly ugly period trying to establish child support arrangements, Mom and Paige had helped organize paperwork because I was working nights. They had access because I trusted them. You told the board Rachel was unstable after being abandoned by Eli's father, Ethan continued. You made her worst year sound like evidence she could not do the work she was already doing successfully. Paige's face flooded red. You don't understand. Then explain. She looked around at everyone watching. She always gets sympathy. That was her defense. Not denial. Resentment. Everything Rachel does becomes some inspiring survival story. She gets praised for working during disasters. She gets praised for raising Eli. She gets praised for making it through Daniel leaving. I did everything right, Ethan. Her voice cracked. I built my career. I found you. I planned this wedding. Why does she still get to be the impressive one? I felt something inside me detach. For years, I had wondered what I needed to change so Paige would stop treating me like competition. The answer was nothing. She needed me beneath her. Ethan lowered the microphone slightly. You damaged your sister's career because I respected her work, Paige cried. I was scared you respected her more than me. Respect isn't pie, Paige. Dad stood. Enough. This is a wedding. Ethan's father, Mark Cole, spoke from his chair. Frank, maybe that is exactly why this should have mattered sooner. Dad glared at him. Mom whispered to Paige, Stop talking. Paige turned on her. You told me to send it. Several guests gasped. Mom shook her head quickly. I told you to protect your relationship. You said Rachel needed to be knocked down a little. I did not even feel shock anymore. Shock requires some belief that people might behave differently. Ethan looked at Paige as though he were meeting her. I cannot celebrate a marriage with someone who needs her own sister to stay ashamed so she can feel successful. Paige stared. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm leaving tonight. They had completed a private legal ceremony earlier that afternoon. Ethan did not pretend the marriage could disappear with one dramatic sentence. He simply took off his jacket, placed the microphone down, and said, We will deal with everything else tomorrow. That was somehow more devastating than a movie-style cancellation. He stopped participating in the performance. Paige began crying openly. My father turned toward me. You happy? Of course. The truth arrived, so it became my responsibility again. I stood. No. My voice surprised me by remaining steady. But I am done. Mom said, Rachel, please do not add to this. I laughed. Add to it? I opened my clutch and removed Eli's note. My son asked me this morning whether you would be nice to me tonight. I lied to him. Nobody spoke. I held up the paper. He wrote, Mom can leave if people are mean. An 8-year-old understands a boundary this family has spent 35 years teaching me to ignore. Paige wiped her face. Oh, here comes the martyr speech. I looked at her. No, Paige. Martyrs stay. That silenced her. I turned toward my parents. I paid for the guest shuttles because you told me the budget was tight. I spent 5 vacation days fixing wedding problems. I left my son home because Paige said his existence complicated photographs. Then you moved me away from the family table because I did not bring a husband, and apparently that still wasn't enough. You needed to turn my child into a joke in front of strangers. Dad muttered. It was humor. Would it be funny if I called Paige defective because her husband just walked out? Mom flinched. Paige said, That's different. It always is when it happens to you. I picked up the walnut box containing the compass. Paige looked at it. What is that? Your wedding gift. I opened it and read the engraving aloud. May you always know what deserves to guide you. Ethan looked down. I closed the box. I think I need it more. Then I walked out. The parking lot was freezing. I reached my car before my hands began shaking. My phone exploded with messages almost immediately. Mom, come back. Your sister is falling apart. Dad, this family has been humiliated enough. Paige, Ethan will not talk to me because you stood there acting innocent. An aunt, you should have handled this privately. Nobody asked how I was. That realization made the next choice easy. I called Eli's babysitter. He was awake. Mom? Hey, buddy. Was everybody nice? I leaned against the car. No, he was silent. Did you leave? Yes. Good. 10 minutes later, I was driving back to Denver in formal clothes with the brass compass on the passenger seat. I stopped at an all-night pancake place near Castle Rock and brought Eli home chocolate chip pancakes at midnight. He ate 3 bites before falling asleep against my shoulder. I looked at his face and understood something I should have learned years earlier. Keeping family peace had begun teaching my son that love meant tolerating humiliation. That stopped that night. The fallout lasted months, but it was not the revenge story my parents later claimed. I did not call Paige's employer. I did not publish the emails. Ethan's foundation reopened the consulting decision because the original concern had been compromised. I interviewed again with people who had no connection to my family and received a 6-month contract. I accepted because I had earned it, not because Ethan felt guilty. Paige's employer eventually learned she had used company equipment to send confidential personal information. She was removed from a major client account, and passed over for promotion, while management reviewed the situation. She kept her job. Consequences do not have to become total destruction to matter. Ethan moved out and stayed with a friend. He and Paige separated. My parents blamed me because blaming the person who stops participating is easier than examining the behavior that required participation. Dad called 3 days after the wedding. Your sister may lose her marriage. That is between Paige and Ethan. You could tell him she was under stress. Was she under stress when she sent the email last year? Silence. Rachel, families forgive mistakes. She did not accidentally attach my custody records. So you are going to destroy your relationship with us over one email? I almost admired the compression. 35 years, reduced to one email. No, I am changing the relationship because the email proved the pattern was real. He called me dramatic and hung up. Mom tried guilt. She sent photographs from the wedding showing Paige surrounded by bridesmaids before the reception collapsed. In one, I was barely visible at the edge holding a garment bag. She wrote, "Look how beautiful everything was before it went wrong." I replied, "It was already wrong. The photographs just didn't show it." Then I muted her. Eli and I spent that summer quietly. I worked. He attended day camp. We bought a used Subaru after my Honda finally failed and celebrated by eating drive-through tacos in the parking lot because every restaurant was packed. I began therapy, partly because I wanted to understand why saying no made me feel cruel, even when the answer was obviously reasonable. My therapist asked me what would happen if I stopped being the capable daughter. I said my family might fall apart. She asked, "And if a family only functions because one person has no boundaries, is it functioning?" I wrote that down. By October, Mom began asking about Thanksgiving. I ignored the first 3 messages. Then my grandmother, Helen, called. She was 84 and lived in Wyoming. "I'm coming down," she said. "Your mother says everyone's fighting." That is one description. Grandma Helen had never been openly cruel to me, but she had been passive. She noticed favoritism and called it personality difference. She told me to keep peace because Paige was sensitive. Age had apparently made her less interested in pretending. "I want to see you and Eli," she said. "But if going to Susan's feels unsafe, we'll eat turkey at a gas station." I laughed. That was the first invitation that sounded like a choice. I agreed to Thanksgiving at my parents' house for 2 hours with conditions. No discussion of Paige's marriage, no pressure to reconcile, no job requests, and no photographs posted of Eli without my permission. Mom replied, "Of course. We only want family together." I should have known. When Eli and I arrived, Paige's SUV was already outside. She had moved back in with our parents after separating from Ethan. She opened the door and barely looked at me. "Mom said you were coming." Grandma asked me. "Right." She looked at Eli. "Hey, buddy." He moved closer to my side. Paige noticed. Her face hardened. "I'm not a monster." Eli said nothing. Children do not owe adults reassurance. The dining room was decorated with pumpkins, candles, and framed family photographs. The wedding portrait Mom displayed did not include Ethan. She had chosen a photograph of Paige alone in her dress and captioned it online. "Our girl remains strong through unexpected heartbreak." I was not surprised. In Mom's version, Paige had survived something that happened to her. My place card was again near the kitchen. Eli's was between Mom and Dad. I moved it beside mine. Mom sighed. "Rachel, he barely sees us." "Then talk to him from across the table," Grandma Helen said. "The boy sits with his mother." That ended it. Dinner stayed civil through turkey. Paige barely spoke, then Dad cleared his throat. "We need to discuss something practical." I put down my fork. We agreed. "This is not about the wedding." Mom jumped in. "Paige has been interviewing in Denver." Paige stared at her plate. "There's a communications opening with your hospital system." I knew exactly where this was going. "No," Dad frowned. "Nobody asked yet." "You're about to." Mom said Paige needed a fresh start and could use a recommendation from someone respected inside the system. "Absolutely not." Paige finally looked at me. I'm qualified. Then apply. A referral would help. Not from me. Her eyes narrowed. You really want me unemployed. You have a job. A job where everyone knows what happened. Because of what you did, Mom whispered. Rachel, compassion. Compassion is not pretending someone is trustworthy in a role where reputation and confidentiality matter. Dad said I was holding a grudge. Then came the second request. Paige's lease in Colorado Springs was ending, and commuting from Fort Collins to Denver interviews was difficult. My townhouse had a finished basement with a guest room. Mom suggested Paige stay a few months. I actually looked around to see if anyone else found the idea insane. No. Mom's face tightened. She's your sister. She used private information about my child to sabotage my career. Paige slammed her fork down. I apologized. You texted sorry everything blew up. What do you want, Rachel? Blood? Accountability would be a nice start. I lost Ethan. I did not make you send that email. I lost my promotion. I did not make you use your work computer. Everyone looks at me differently now. Maybe they know you differently now. Mom began crying. Dad told me to stop attacking Paige. There it was again. Paige could damage my professional reputation, mock my child, help remove me from the family table, and laugh while Dad called me unwanted. My sentence describing the consequences was the attack. Grandma Helen quietly buttered a roll. Susan, she said, you have spent their whole lives asking Rachel to absorb whatever Paige cannot handle. Mom turned toward her. That is not true. Grandma shrugged. It is extremely true. Dad said Grandma was encouraging division. She looked at him. Frank, you called your grandson baggage at a wedding. It was a joke. It was a bad one. Paige suddenly started crying. Why is everyone acting like Rachel never hurt me? I waited. What did I do? You always made me feel stupid. How? You got better grades. I stared at her. Paige, I did not get grades at you. Grandma Helen actually laughed. Paige flushed. You always had to be competent. You always had to fix everything. Mom and Dad compared us too. That was true. Favored children can be harmed by favoritism too. But being harmed does not erase whom you harmed next. I believe you, I said. She looked surprised. But you responded by trying to make me smaller, instead of asking Mom and Dad to stop comparing us. Her face collapsed. For a moment, I saw my little sister instead of my antagonist. Then Mom said, so now we all admit mistakes. Wonderful. Can we move forward? Of course. Accountability had lasted 30 seconds, and Mom already wanted the receipt stamped paid. Moving forward does not mean Paige moves into my basement. Paige wiped her eyes. I wouldn't live with you if you begged. Great. One problem solved. Dad called me cruel. Eli touched my hand under the table. He had barely eaten. I realized I was once again asking my child to sit through adults debating whether his mother's boundaries were selfish. I stood. We're leaving. Mom looked at the clock. You said 2 hours. You agreed to no pressure. This is family conversation. Exactly. I helped Eli with his jacket. Dad said, if you keep walking out every time you're uncomfortable, eventually nobody will invite you. I turned around. Dad, you keep threatening me with losing access to rooms where I'm treated badly. That isn't the punishment you think it is. Grandma Helen pushed back her chair. I'm leaving too. Mom stared. Mother, I came to see Rachel and Eli. I've seen enough of this. We drove to a diner because Grandma's hotel restaurant had stopped serving dinner. At 79 pounds soaking wet and 84 years old, she ate half a turkey club and stole fries from Eli. At one point, she said, I should have spoken up 30 years ago. I asked why she had not. Because your mother cried every time I criticized how she treated Paige, and you always looked fine. That sentence hurt, but it was honest. I was not fine. I know that now. Why didn't you ask? She nodded slowly. That is the question, isn't it? We did not solve 35 years over diner coffee. But for once, somebody older than me sat with the discomfort instead of asking me to remove it. The following Christmas, Eli and I stayed home. We invited two coworkers, a neighbor whose husband was deployed, and Grandma Helen, who insisted on making gravy and nearly started a kitchen fire. Nobody wore matching pajamas. Nobody posed for a curated photograph. Eli built a blanket fort in the living room and made every adult crawl inside. At 9 that night, he fell asleep with his head on my leg. I looked around at the mismatched plates and half-eaten pie and felt something I had spent years trying to earn from my biological family. Belonging. Belonging turned out not to be a seat assigned by blood. It was the absence of fear that the room would become cruel when somebody needed entertainment. Mom sent a long apology in January. The first version focused heavily on stress, wedding pressure, and how difficult it had been raising daughters with different personalities. I did not respond. 2 weeks later, she sent another. I kept asking you to be understanding because you usually were. I protected Paige from consequences because she reacted loudly, and I assumed you would survive whatever was left. That was wrong. I laughed at jokes that should have made me defend you. I helped her send information that was not hers to use. I am ashamed. I read it several times. Then I told her I appreciated the honesty and was not ready for a normal relationship. She wrote back, I understand. For once, she did not immediately prove she did not understand. Dad never gave a real apology. He sent birthday messages and once wrote, Life's too short for grudges. I replied, agreed. That is why I stopped spending mine in places where disrespect is called humor. He did not answer. Paige took longer. Almost a year after the wedding, she asked to meet at a coffee shop. I nearly refused. Then she wrote, I am not asking for a job, money, a place to stay, or help with Mom and Dad. I just want to apologize without making you manage my feelings. That was specific enough that I agreed. She looked different, not worse, less assembled. She said therapy had forced her to admit she had built her identity around being the daughter who had done everything correctly. My pregnancy scared her because it gave the family a clear way to place me beneath her. Then I kept building a good life anyway. Every success I had threatened a hierarchy she had mistaken for love. When Ethan respected your work, she said, I felt like he was discovering you were the better version of me. I'm not a version of you. I know. And you weren't competing with me until you decided you were. She nodded. Then she apologized for using Eli's custody information. No excuses. She apologized for excluding him from the wedding. She apologized for the toast. I knew Dad would laugh, she admitted. That was part of why I said it. That one hurt. Why? Because when he laughed at you, I felt chosen. There it was, finally. The entire system in one sentence. And how do you feel now? She looked down at her coffee. Like being chosen by someone because they're hurting, somebody else isn't love. I did not hug her. I did not say everything was okay. I told her I accepted the apology as a beginning. We began with occasional texts. She asked whether she could mail Eli a birthday card. I asked him. He said yes, but did not want to see her yet. Paige accepted that. A year earlier, she would have called his boundary evidence I had poisoned him. Growth sometimes looks like somebody accepting no without making you pay for it. Ethan and Paige never reconciled. I stayed out of their marriage. Ethan eventually sent me one message, thanking me for not turning his decision into part of my family fight. I wished him well. The consulting work with his foundation ended after 18 months, and by then my hospital system had promoted me to Regional Resilience Director. The role came with more responsibility, better money, and a parking space I pretended not to care about. I bought the Subaru I had postponed for Paige's wedding. Eli picked the color. Blue, obviously. The brass compass still sits on my desk. I never gave it away. The engraving that had been intended for Paige and Ethan became something I read before hard decisions. May you always know what deserves to guide you. For most of my life, what guided me was fear. Fear of being called jealous. Fear of upsetting Mom. Fear of proving Dad right that I was difficult. Fear that Paige would cry. Fear that refusing one request might reveal I was never loved, only useful. Then my son wrote 6 words on notebook paper and gave me a better compass. Mom can leave if people are mean. Children simplify what adults complicate to protect bad habits. Today, I am 38. Eli is 11 and no longer obsessed with hurricanes. He has moved on to aviation, which means there are model airplanes on every surface in my house, and apparently, I now know too much about wing shapes. Mom sees us occasionally. Visits happen because I choose them, not because guilt schedules them. Dad sees Eli rarely because he still cannot resist jokes that sound too much like insults. Paige and I are not best friends. We may never be. We are two women cautiously building a relationship outside the roles our parents assigned us. Sometimes she catches herself asking me to fix something and says, "Never mind, I can handle it." Sometimes I offer help because I genuinely want to. Choice makes the same action feel completely different. That was the deepest lesson I took from the wedding. My family had confused my ability to endure with consent. They believed because I could solve problems, I should solve theirs. Because I survived abandonment, jokes about abandonment were harmless. Because I managed single motherhood well, they could pretend it had not been hard. Because I kept showing up, they assumed no treatment would ever make me leave. They were wrong. Self-worth did not arrive when Ethan defended me in that ballroom. I am grateful he told the truth, but another person's courage cannot become the foundation of your dignity. Self-worth arrived when I picked up my coat after the truth came out and refused to stay long enough for my family to negotiate the size of my pain. It arrived again at Thanksgiving when I realized an apology did not entitle Paige to my house or my professional reputation. It arrived every time I chose not to explain a boundary for the 20th time. I used to think the opposite of family rejection was family approval. Now I know the opposite is freedom from needing their approval to believe your own life has value. My sister's wedding did not destroy our family. It exposed the arrangement holding it together. Paige was allowed to be fragile, Dad was allowed to be cruel, Mom was allowed to call avoidance peace, and I was expected to be strong enough for everyone. The moment I stopped volunteering for that job, they called me selfish because the work had to go somewhere else. I no longer apologize for that. I am still strong. I simply stopped treating strength like a public utility. So tell me honestly, if your own sister humiliated you and your child at her wedding after secretly sabotaging a career opportunity you earned, while your parents helped her do it, would a sincere apology ever be enough to let them back into your life? Or would you decide that some relationships only become healthy once they learn they can actually lose access to you?